5 pillars more specifically, so we'll save that for next week. So the next question after what is Islam is what is Iman? And Iman is what we translate maybe as faith or conviction. And so he tell me about Iman. And so there are, the scholars, this is not like in a hadith, you won't find these, levels in a hadith, but the scholars have tried to break down Iman into 5 different parts, like 5 different types of Iman for 5 different types of people. So there's the Iman that they call Iman al-Matbu', which is like a natural Iman. And this is the Iman of angels. There is no free will, there's no decision to be a mu'min, not a mu'min. They're just created in Iman, they believe in Allah, and they're able to witness the unseen. And there's no other choice than that. It's like a natural thing. So 99.99999% of everything is Iman Matbu'. Like the rocks believe in Allah, and trees believe in Allah, and everything, your body, even if you're a non-believer, believes in Allah. Like everything believes in Allah, just naturally. That's the creation. And humans and jinn are given the very unique situation where we get to choose our conscious Iman or not. And then there's the Iman Ma'soom, which is essentially the protected or the infallible Iman, and that's the Iman that's given to prophets and messengers. All the prophets and messengers, we believe, were never mushrikeen, they never associated anything with Allah. All messengers and prophets, even before they were given message, believed in one God. And then the rules and the regulations and the religion and all these things came through revelation. But no messenger ever associated anything with Allah, ever. And so that's a ma'soom, like a protected kind of Iman. Then there's Iman Maqbool, which means like an accepted Iman. That's the Iman that's like, it believes in the right things, and you're doing it in the right way, essentially. And Allah accepts that kind of Iman. It's like a sincere Iman. There's Iman Mawquf, which means kind of a suspended Iman, which, if you have innovations or certain deviations in your belief, in what you believe, it's not that like Allah doesn't accept from you and He accepts your intentions, but that the belief itself needs correction to be fully accepted and to be part of like a higher level. And then there's Iman that's mardud, rejected Iman. And the obvious example is the hypocrites, who their Iman is rejected. So what does the Prophet ﷺ respond when he's asked, what is Iman? فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنِ الْإِيمَانِ. So the first one is فَأَخْبِرْنِي, or تَشْهَدُ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So the first one is to believe that there is no deity except for Allah. And this is part of Tawheed. And again, Tawheed is part of both Islam and part of Iman, this La ilaha illallah. And so we'll go into, again, a little more depth next week, but suffice it to say for this week that Tawheed is such a cornerstone of the entire religion. Surah Al-Ikhlas, for example, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that surah, there's a hadith that says that it is 1/3 of the Quran, and many people comment on this saying that Surah Al-Ikhlas' whole point is that it is about Tawheed, about there is one God and He has no sons and nothing created Him, and He's not created from anything, no partners. And so that concept that there is this uniqueness, this oneness to Allah is fundamental to our faith and our action and everything in Islam. It's like the cornerstone. It's always mentioned as the first point. And so that is Tawheed, and that is something that we should never leave up to grabs in this world. It's not up for negotiation or debate. There is the unique circumstance that people always bring up that's like a rhetorical circumstance in our lives, alhamdulillah. Maybe you never experienced that kind of a test, but like what if your life depends on, for example, like someone puts a gun to your head and says you disbelieve in Allah, right? And like a lot of Sahaba face these similar situations, like we will kill you or your family if you believe in Allah. And many people around the world actually experience this to this day. But it's very much outside of our realm of belief. But even in that situation, Muhammad ﷺ allowed for us, in the Quran it's mentioned, like you can on the exterior say what you need to say to save your life, or you could say what you need to say to become a martyr. Both are accepted paths, and that's an exterior thing. But on the inside, there is no situation in the universe that is like permissible for you to disbelieve in God in your hearts. So that is something that should be like rock solid for us. There's no exception to this, ever. Everything else is an exception except that. The next thing that we believe in is the angels. And the angels, what we believe in them is that they obviously exist. They're part of the unseen. They make no mistakes, neither in action nor in faith. They don't have free will. The angels, there's a lot of them. There's a hadith that says that there is, just like we have a Kaaba and Mecca, and people do pilgrimage to the Kaaba, then there's also similar kind of not metaphorical, it's like a similar structure in the heavens called Bayt al-Ma'mur, where every single day since the beginning of creation until now and until the end of creation, there is 70,000 angels that go and visit that every single day, and they do their seventh tawaf, and they leave, and they never come back. There's no repetition. There's been new sets of 70,000 angels every seventh tawaf since the beginning of creation, and there will always be. That's how many angels there are. That's like one example of it. And angels do a lot of things. They guard the gates of heaven and hell. They take your soul. There's an angel that takes your soul. They write down the books of your deeds, the good deeds and the bad deeds. There's angels that, the angel that will blow the trumpet and bring about the last day. The angels that hold up the throne of Allah. So each angel is given a task and a purpose, and they all have roles. But we don't know all of them, obviously. And one of their functions is to obviously relay the message to the prophets. And that was primarily Jibril's role. And he would, he taught the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the Quran, and he brought him the Quran, and he brought him prayer and taught him how to pray. And so that's a fundamental part of our faith, because it's part of the transmission that we have between us and Allah, is this step. So if you go through these, as we go through them, you'll realize that there's a reason for this order as well. So first we have belief in one God, and the next is angels. So the next thing is books. And so books, for example, we have the Quran. That's an example of a book. There are an unknown number of books throughout history. We don't know exactly how many books there have been. The Quran mentions 4 complete books that have come down. The first is Zabur. There's the Torah, and the Injil, and the Quran. Zabur is for Sayyidina Dawood, Torah for Sayyidina Musa, Injil is for Sayyidina Isa, and the Quran came to Sayyidina Muhammad. So those are 4 complete sets of books and law and codes and belief and everything, the whole structure came down, mentioned in the Quran. There's other things called like suhuf, which is, you could say, like scrolls or pages, tablets, whatever that is, that are mentioned in the Quran, like Suhufi Ibrahim wa Musa, for example. So like Sayyidina Ibrahim was not given, the Quran doesn't mention a full book given to him, but it mentions that he was given scrolls. And so I personally don't know the distinction between the two, but that might exist out there. Now, what's important about this point is that someone might say, okay, if you believe in the Injil, you believe in the Bible, why don't you follow the Bible, what the Bible says and what the Bible believes? And so how would you answer that question? If we believe in the Bible, why don't we follow it? And there's obviously the first point is that we believe in the original Bible that came to Jesus, Isa alayhi salatu salam. And that we also believe that it's been changed and corrupted over time. Things have been added, removed, changed. So there's no way to tell what's new or changed or removed or anything. So you can't take from it, because that authenticity is gone. And the second point being that there's a concept called nesakh. Nesakh means abrogation. Abrogation means that you take the new thing replaces the old thing, right? So for example, if you're driving on a freeway and the speed limit on the freeway is 65 miles per hour, let's say, and then there's a construction that happens. During construction, they reduce the speed limit to 35. Now, if you drive 65 there and the cop pulls you over, he'll give you a ticket, and you'll tell him, this was 65 miles per hour and I was driving 65. He'll tell you it was 65, now it's 35, now you have to go to court. And it's the same thing with nasakh, where the new thing comes and replaces the old thing. And so the Quran has done nasakh on the previous books before it, so there's no need to follow any book other than the Quran, because it's comprehensive. And the other thing is that the Quran is the last book, as we know, and Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the last messenger, as we know. And so that should be part of a warning for us, that first of all, Allah promised to preserve it, so there's no corruption in the Quran now. It's preserved through the hearts of men, and it's written down in books. But the primary mode of transmission for the Quran is orally. It's through our memory, through our hearts. And it's interesting, like, I remember hearing a lecture once where the Sheikh said, can you imagine right now, like, let's just take a situation where, let's say, every book and computer and written documents in the whole world burns and just disappears overnight. Everything is gone. How long would it take, and what would you be able to even reconstruct? Imagine, like, for example, the municipal codes of Berkeley. Like, would anyone ever be able to reconstruct the municipal codes of Berkeley? Like, probably never. The Constitution, maybe if you get some, like, lawyers or something, right? Like, it'll take days, weeks, years for people to recollect. It won't be authentic, no one will know. But if the Quran in any city, anywhere in the whole world, within minutes, you'd have a Quran back, exactly how it was, with tashkil and like verified by like 100 people. It doesn't matter if you're in Berkeley or Dallas or Mecca or Medina or in Indonesia, it doesn't matter, like you will have the whole Quran preserved, which is amazing, it's a miracle. And the prophets, the next point is that we believe in prophets. And so here it says, it mentions Rusul in this narration, but we know that there is Anbiya and Mursaleen. So what's the distinction between a Nabi and a Rasul? So a Rasul is a messenger, is how we would translate it, a messenger. Nabi we translate as prophet. But the distinction, people have had different commentaries on what the distinction is between the two. But the most common that I've heard is that the Rasul is one that brings a new message, essentially like a new book, a new set of legislation from Allah, like a new religion. And a Nabi is someone who revives that religion of the messenger that came before them, but doesn't necessarily bring something new. And so the example is, for example, like Musa and Harun, they were brothers. And Musa brought a new religion. He brought the Torah, a whole new book, brought a new religion for his people. But Harun didn't bring a new religion. He didn't bring a new book. He didn't innovate anything like different. It was exactly the religion of Musa. He was just making sure that it persisted and propagated, and people were reminded of that message. And so that happens in cycles. There's different narrations as to how many prophets and messengers there have been. There's a minimum, like authentic narration of 124,000 prophets. And I recently heard that there's a narration that says over 300,000 prophets, prophets, so Anbiya were sent to mankind. So imagine in the hundreds of thousands there have been prophets. Every people have received a prophet. And for messengers, the estimate I've heard was, I believe it was like 300, it was a little more than 300, like it was like 315 or 320 something. It was a little over 300 messengers were sent throughout all time. And so the interesting thing about that is that there was always new prophets and messengers coming to renew or bring a new message when it was needed. When the old message was corrupted or forgotten or people stopped listening to it. And so Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the final messenger, and the Quran was the final book, which means two things. One is that it's complete and it's protected by Allah. But the other thing that means is that we're also very close to the end. If the Quran is going to stay with us till the end of times, that means that, and it's the last book, that means we are the last people before the end of times, and that's something that we need to take into account. And that brings us to our next point, is that there's a Day of Judgment, which is the next point of belief that we have. And the Day of Judgment is an important thing on that point. There's a lot that you could talk about it, and there's so many things and so many narrations on what happens on the Day of Judgment, and the difficulties and the trials and the tribulations and the mercy that happens on that day. But the first thing is that it reminds us, the important point here is that it reminds us of a life after death, and that we're going to be held accountable for everything that we do and we say and that we're given in this life. And a good kind of gauge, like I was listening to the lecture by Mufti Kamani to prepare for this lecture, and he mentioned a good point where he said that there's a hadith that says, whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah will love to meet you. And whoever dislikes or despises to meet Allah, Allah will despise to meet you. And so the state of your heart and your connection to Allah, like that's going to be the way Allah receives you. And so it's always good to kind of refresh in our mind, like what is our state right now with Allah? If I died in the next 10 minutes and I met Allah, what would that feel like? Would I feel happy? Would I look forward to it? Do I feel mercy? Do I feel afraid? Do I feel like, oh my God, like I messed up, I need to fix myself? Those are all things like it's a good kind of like litmus test, a good gauge of how we're doing in the moment, to kind of reflect on that. And so that's belief in the Day of Judgment. And then the last thing is Qadr. And Qadr is a whole conversation on its own, and that's like a conversation that you could spend hours and hours talking about. But I'm just going to try to define the terms for everybody. So there's two concepts that are related to Qadr. So there's Qada and Qadr. Those are usually mentioned together when the topic's brought up. Qadr, the linguistics of it, comes from to estimate. Or to know the value of something. So for example, if you take somebody who's a car expert, you take them to a car auction, they'll know exactly how much that car is valued at, and they'll be able to make a good deal. And so that ability to estimate something's value accurately, very well, comes in Qadr. That's like part of the meaning of Qadr. The other meaning of it is power, Laylatul Qadr, right? The night of power. And so what is meant here is like by destiny or divine decree. What that means is that there are things that Allah has determined ahead of time, before even creation was set about. Allah had determined certain outcomes. Qada, on the other hand, is the past tense version of that, essentially. Qada is like something that has been decreed, is what that means. And so the way people kind of try to describe it is, if you imagine like a circle where everything in the circle is like everything Allah has ever decreed or will decree in the future. Qada is the subset of those things that has already happened, right? So Allah like decreed that there will be a final prophet and he'll be the best of creation. It's part of Qada now because it's already happened and the specifics have already been laid out. And so the point that people have difficulty with here is like, how does that fit with our accountability? Accountability means you have a choice to make and you're going to be held accountable for it. And so that's a whole conversation. But from this kind of arguments, very early in Islam, there's two extreme groups that popped out, which is just important to know that. But there's the Jabariyah and the Qadariyah. Qadariyah were the extreme on one end, where they said that everything was decreed and deterministic, and so that there's no responsibility for anybody because you couldn't control yourself. Allah's like, you're just a puppet and everything's happening to you. You can't do anything. And that was one extreme, and they obviously acted in that extreme. The other extreme was the Jabariyah, who said that no, you're responsible for everything and you are the agent that like does every single action and you have power over every single action. And that means Allah doesn't know or doesn't have power to control you. So those are two extremes, and we're like exactly in the middle of that. Allah has power to control and knows everything, but that knowledge and that power does not take away from our will, like our free will, to decide in each moment. And within our context, like we'll be held accountable, inshallah. So that's kind of just like a very brief overview of that concept. Yeah, I think that should be good enough for that. For ihsan, so the next question is that Jibreel asked is, what is ihsan? And that's a very, very, very beautiful answer the Prophet ﷺ gives. It is that you worship Allah as if you see Him, and even if you don't see Him, know that He sees you. And that's such a beautiful summary of everything. Ghazali, when he was reflecting on this point, he said that if people were to really understand this, they would never sin. Because, if, for example, you're in the room with your mom, like, you're not going to, like, secretly drink, or you're not going to secretly, like, do something illicit. Like, your mom's there. And so that kind of any shame, humility, ability to, like, act out of respect to your mother is kind of like that similitude is what exists with Allah, except unlike your mother who's not always with you, Allah's always there and always watching. And so that's why if we were able to like kind of really reflect on this point and remind ourselves of this point over and over again, it would help us a lot in difficult situations where we find ourselves tempted or thinking the wrong way. It's very important to follow this point. And also it's interesting that it's even called ihsan. Ihsan means like from hasana, which is something that's like very good or excellent. So ihsan is like the act of being excellent, right? And so it's knowledge of Allah and awareness of Allah should be pushing us to be performing the best in each and every single moment. And that's why it's such a difficult thing. And it's almost like you could see this progression. Islam is this physical submission, Iman is this internal submission, and then here's ihsan is this excellence, and it's this last point in your journey, because it's such a difficult thing to achieve, and it's a lifelong, thing that you have to work on yourself to keep reminding yourself that Allah's there and He's watching. And it's as if like it was a physical thing, like just like I know my phone's here and I know Arham's here to my left, then I also know that Allah's here and is watching me. So that's the point on ihsan. And so the next thing is that he says, tell me about the hour, right? When is the hour going to come? And to this, Muhammad ﷺ responds, it's such an eloquent response. Like this, I feel like this point itself, you could sit here and study and reflect on the mind of the Prophet ﷺ. Like you can imagine him thinking in this moment. If you reflect back on what Jibreel said before, every time he asked a question, he knew the answer to it. Like he asked him, what is Islam? Muhammad ﷺ told him, and then he said, Sadaqt, which means like you're right, which means Jibreel knows the answer. And that happened for every question. What is Islam? What is Iman? What is Ihsan? Jibreel knows the answer. Now he asks, what is the hour? Now Muhammad ﷺ wants to make sure that the listeners, us and the Sahaba at the time, knew that Jibreel doesn't know the answer to this question. Because that creates a lot of problems, because then you'll get a sect of people that believe like, oh, Jibreel knows the unseen, and they start worshipping Jibreel, and it becomes like a whole problem. So he's trying to avoid this whole like intellectual iman frenzy that's going to happen by saying that the one who's being questioned doesn't know more than the one who's questioning. And he's like, I don't know, and you don't know. But he's saying it in such a very nice way. He's not saying you don't know. Like he says, like in such a very nice, like adab, like such a good character kind of way. So it's very beautiful, that response. And so to that, Jibreel replies, what are the signs of the Day of Judgment? And this, for me, like for a long time, it seemed like it didn't belong to me. Like I was just like, why? Like you're going through, like for example, you're giving da'wah to someone, they don't know anything about Islam, and you want to give like a 5-minute summary. What is Islam? You'll tell them like, here's Islam and the 5 pillars, here's Iman and the 6 pillars of faith, and here's Ihsan, what we're all striving for, and we believe in this last day. But then like, would you tell them about the signs of the Day of Judgment? Like would you sit there and just kind of like, oh yeah, this is going to happen and these are prophecies? It always, for me, it's kind of stood out. And it's very, very important to note that here's Jibreel, he's teaching us our religion. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the end of the hadith we went over, he says that Jibreel came to teach you your religion. And with that came the teaching of the signs of the Day of Judgment, which is super important because, like we mentioned, we're the last ummah. We have the final book, we have the final messenger, we're the last people. It's going to last until the Day of Judgment. Like, it's our people, our ummah is going to experience this. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was setting us up to prepare for the coming of the Day of Judgment, which is going to happen in our ummah's lifetime. And so it's important to know these signs. And it's interesting, so like there are, I don't know the exact number, there's like, I want to say like 55 plus or minus 10, like it's within that ballpark of authentic, there's minor signs and major signs. Let's go into that first. There's minor signs and major signs. So there's minor signs of the Day of Judgment are not minor, but they're signs that are leading up to like the final end days, right? The first one of those was the Prophet ﷺ's birth, the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. Every messenger and prophet before him foretold that there would be a final messenger, and his name's Ahmad, and he's gonna like have these characteristics. So he was the fulfillment of prophecies before him. And during his time, there were signs of the Day of Judgment, like the ripping of the moon, اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر, like the hour has drawn near and the moon has been split apart. So within his lifetime, there were signs, and then since his time, there have been intermittent like signs kind of scattered throughout history. And from those minor signs, there's about, I'd say, I forgot the number, there's around 55, I want to say within that ballpark, 57 authentic minor signs, and then there's many, many other ones that are less authentic. And so a very beautiful reflection on it is that when you read these signs, so in this hadith, 2 of them are mentioned. When you read them, oftentimes it's hard to kind of imagine what that looks like in reality until it actually happens. And a very good point of this is that the Prophet ﷺ said that one of the signs will be a fire that comes out of Arabia, and it will be so big and so huge that it will, for days on end, you'll be able to, in Syria, be able to see the hairs on the camel's neck at night. So imagine you can see the individual hairs on a camel's neck in Syria from a fire happening in Saudi Arabia. So it's like, how does that happen? And people were like, it's going to be a giant bonfire, and people projected that it was going to be, people made all these predictions. It ended up being a volcano. The volcano erupted in 1262, I believe, AD, and it went on for 52 days, a massive volcano. And you could still see satellite imagery of it. There's a giant lava track that's still there. It went like right around Medina. And it was confirmed that people in Syria saw like their camels at night glowing red from the volcano happening at a distance. So that's like one example of it. And so the ones that are mentioned here is which means that the slave mistress will give birth to her master. So like a woman will give birth to her master. She will be a slave to that master. And so there's like a lot of people who try to comment on this, what that could mean. The 2 kind of camps, there's like a smaller opinion. I heard this from a lecture from Hamza Yusuf, who said that there's a group of people who at one point in history thought that this literally happened because there was like a legal system set up in such a way where essentially slaves were giving birth to like their masters. The masters would become free and would become their owners. And so there's like a small period in history where that actually happened. But majority of people say that what this could be referring to or alluding to is that children will be born and they'll have such disrespect and disregard for their parents. They'll have such a sense of entitlement that their parents will essentially become slaves to them. And we can see elements of this in our day and age, where like, a parent can't even say anything to their child, and the child, feels like they own the world, and they can yell at their parents and cuss at their parents and all these things. So that might be an element of it, Allahu A'lam. And the next one is even more obvious, I think, in our times. It's like ridiculous that it's so clearly happening. So it says, وَأَن تَرَى الْحُفَاةَ الْعُرَاةَ الْعَلَاةَ رِعَى الشَّاءِ يَتَطَاوَلُونَ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ, which means that you will see that the barefoot, like not fully clothed, very poor shepherds of sheep competing in the building of tall buildings. And this is like literally happening right now in front of our very eyes, like right next to Mecca. There's the third tallest building in the world. In Saudi and Riyadh, they're building right now the tallest building in the world. The current tallest building, it will be the tallest building, and the current tallest building is in Dubai. And now, Qatar wants to outcompete them. So there are all these people like outcompeting themselves. And there's a quote, and I forgot his name. It was the King of the Emirates. He said that his grandfather and his father had ridden camels in the desert. They were poor people, and he was driving a Mercedes, and that his children were driving Land Rovers, and their children were gonna drive Land Rovers. He said, my great-grandchildren will ride camels again, because it's unsustainable wealth that they have. And he realized it, and they're coming from nothing, like they're poor shepherds, and now they're building tall buildings. So it's a very kind of clear analogy of what's happening in front of our very eyes, which is very cool. And then Jibril leaves after this, and he says, فَلَبُثْتُ مَلِيئًا, which means like I waited a while. And this is Umar talking. And some people say that he waited about 3 days afterwards, which shows us the etiquette of seeking knowledge. Like he was patient, he didn't go up to the Prophet like, oh, who was that? And so then he says, Muhammad ﷺ actually approaches him, and he says, do you know who that was? And he says, no. And he says, that was Jibreel, he came to teach you your religion. And it shows us that importance of this hadith. It's like a foundation and summary of our entire religion in one hadith. And there's so much to kind of extract from it, but that's kind of the foundations of that hadith and the etiquette that we can derive from it and the lessons we can derive from it. So may Allah accept. I know I went a little over time this time, but inshallah we'll be able to get through it. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.